welcome to Vitality Unlocked. I'm Dan Garner, scientist, performance coach, and Chief Innovation Officer of Vitality Blueprint. This show does one thing: convert cutting-edge science into practical strategies for high-performance health. Each episode, we take one target and run it through a simple filter. Topic, mechanisms, current state of the evidence, and your next game plan. No fluff, no gimmicks. Who's it for? The individuals who want to be on the forefront of science and have an expectation of objective proof and not just ideas. The people who want actionable strategies from the data and not overcomplicate the solutions in real-life application. If you want a body and mind that converts stress into adaptation, you're in the right place. This is Vitality Unlocked. Hey there, and welcome to the very first episode of Vitality Unlocked. I am Dan Garner, and in this episode, I'm going to be redefining resilience because I think a lot of people get it wrong in the industry these days. But before I do that, I do want to thank you so much for coming and checking out this first episode, all right? Thank you for giving me the most precious resource in the world, which is your time. I know there's a million other places that you could be placing that right now. So it's people like you that allow people like me to do what I love for a living. And man, do I love educating. I love it. I love the process of learning, but I love even more the process of sharing. Okay, being able to share this information with you, my theories, my concepts, what I think is the top literature that you need to know in order to become the best version of yourself. This is very exciting to me. So you're going to see me talk very passionately across the Vitality Unlocked series. You're going to hear me yell a lot of times across this series, and that is involuntary. By the way, I will be yelling lots across this series, but again, thank you so much. Let's dive in. Resilience is the topic today, okay? Elite athletes, soldiers, CEOs, the everyday person, we are all exposed to the same thing. We're exposed to stress. But the difference between breaking down and breaking through is resilience, okay? Resilience is really what everybody is after. It doesn't matter what goal you want. If you're not resilient, you're not going to attain it. If you want to build muscle, drop body fat, if you want to take your cognition to the next level, if you're trying to learn new things, if you're not resilient, if you cannot remain stable across changing environments, you're not going to achieve that goal. Like, resilience is that important. But the thing with resilience and why episode 1 is about resilience is because a lot of people actually mistake what it is. And they mistake what it is because, number one, they're not defining it. And number two, they're not measuring it. And when you don't define something before targeting it, and you don't know how to objectively measure it when doing program design, then you kind of just have a shotgun approach. You're hoping something works, and then your ongoing foundation for continuing to improve that protocol is completely guesswork because you don't know what you're after. And I think that's why resilience is everywhere these days. It's on all across social media. It's all across every single platform. And it's because if people aren't defining it and they aren't properly measuring it, you can attach it to anything. You can attach resilience to breath work. You can attach it to a supplement. You can attach it to a specific circuit. You can attach it to an ice bath. You can attach resilience to anything if you're not defining and measuring it. But what I want to talk to you about today, you can kind of glean by now, it's not a motivational talk and it's not a mindset talk. This will be a biology talk. When you leave this first episode here, you will know how to define resilience. You will know how to measure resilience. You will know the things to look for in your blood work in order to move your resilience forward and program very accurately. And you're going to know the most powerful thing that you can do in order to be a more resilient person now and as you age. But to kick this off, we have to define it. All right? We need to identify what we're actually doing here. And in a very simplistic sense, resilience is the ability to withstand stress without being knocked out of homeostasis. And if you should, how quickly you can get back to it. Okay? That difference between being knocked out of homeostasis and how quickly you can get back to it, that's resilience right there. The gap between that change and your ability to maintain stability through change, that is resilience, okay? And that's mental and physical. This is all one interconnected thing. In a simple way, it can be defined in that single sentence. In a more scientific way, you want to look at homeostasis versus allostasis. Homeostasis is the body's proclivity to want to maintain an equilibrium. Okay, it wants things even and balanced and where they like it. Allostasis represents the processes at which your body needs to do in order to maintain homeostasis. Allostatic load represents the stressors being applied to the body that are forcing the processes to either increase in frequency or intensity to achieve a state of homeostasis. All right? It's a lot of stasises all in one, but here's an example. If you have a blood sugar, okay? My body wants to maintain a stable and even and healthy blood sugar. That is a state of homeostasis. Allostasis would represent insulin, C-peptide, glucose transporter 4, muscle contractions. My body, those processes represent the pathways at which my body needs to do in order to achieve homeostasis. That is a state of allostasis. Allostasis is remaining stable through change with the processes of the body allowing you to do that. Allostatic load is the intensity or the things throwing off that homeostatic state. So in the case of blood sugar, that could be stress, that could be insulin resistance, that could be a lack of exercise, that could be way too many processed carbohydrates in the diet in comparison to your energy expenditure. This is all the amount of a total stress load that impacts the severity of allostasis, that impacts whether or not you're going to be able to achieve homeostasis, and importantly, how fast you're going to be able to get back to homeostasis. People who have been following me, they know this little next rant that I'm about to do, but if you're new here, you have to hear it, okay? You do not build muscle in the gym. You do not build strength in the gym, and you do not build power in the gym. What you do is stimulate power development, stimulate strength development, or stimulate muscle development in the gym. Everything you do outside of the gym determines whether or not you're actually going to adapt to that stimulus, okay? This is why stimulus is 100% and adaptation is 100%. They are equal, okay? You ever come across somebody who really actually trains hard on a consistent basis, but they don't really have a lot to show for it? That's somebody who's all stimulus, no adaptation. This is typically the person who trains hard, but then they don't really care about their sleep or their nutrition or their stress management, or maybe they're into partying too much. They do get the training in, but they're not making the progress to reflect the effort that they're putting in the gym. A lot of stimulus, no adaptation. On the other end of the spectrum, you got a group of people who are so focused on mobility and yoga and breath work and having the perfect sleep environment that they forgot to train hard. This is the person who's all adaptation and no stimulus. You need both if you want maximum results. You need both if you want to achieve a state of high performance health. And this is why it's annoying when someone says training is 20% and nutrition's 80%, man, or training's 30%, nutrition's 70%. No, it's not. That doesn't make any sense at all, because training is a stimulus and nutrition would be the adaptation. So that means training is 100% and nutrition is 100%, because you can't have one without the other. They're useless without each other. Okay? You need both in order to maximize progress. Now, this allostasis reflection here that we're discussing is very important in this episode, but also in every single episode moving forward, because the people who follow me, they are training. They are exposed to stress, whether it's from their job, whether it's from their training, whether it's from competition, whether it's from public speaking, whether it's from having a 3-year-old toddler like I've got. You've got stressors that you're exposed to on a daily basis, and you are here to identify resilience pathways that you can utilize in order to be more resilient to those stressors. That is allostasis, you guys. Homeostasis is the equilibrium. Allostasis is your ability to maintain stability through change. That's what you want. Remaining stable through change. You're exposed to training stress. You're exposed to work stress. You're exposed to bad traffic. You're exposed to these things, but your body's got a buffer in it. Your body, it doesn't have a door, a buffer door between stress and knocking you out of homeostasis. That door is not made of tissue paper. That door is made of stainless steel, okay? That is allostasis, is stability through change, okay? Very important that you know the concepts of homeostasis, allostasis, and allostatic load, because it really impacts your training as well. It's been a hallmark coaching philosophy of my career is the reduction of allostatic load opens you up for more adaptive potential. Meaning, if I have less internal stressors in my physiology and I have less external stressors, let's say from psychological stress, emotional stress, environmental stress, when I am able to reduce total allostatic load, well, now more of my allostasis pathways can be guided toward adapting to training as opposed to safeguarding me against the other stressors in life. You can think about your adaptive potential like a pie chart. Okay, you have 100% adaptive potential. If 50% of that pie chart is going towards not training stimulus, well, then 50% of that is going towards not training stimulus. Your adaptive potential is now half of what it otherwise would have been. Okay, your allostatic load is critical because it determines your state of allostasis, which determines how stable you are through change and whether or not you're actually going to utilize your adaptive potential each and every single time you step in the gym, whether or not you're actually going to get maximum ROI for every single rep that you do, every single run that you do. That is critical and has been the hallmark of all of the coaching success. I identify stressors wherever they are, eliminate them, that reduces the allostatic load, improves the state of allostasis, and maximizes adaptive potential. That works for health as much as it works for performance, as much as it works for anything else. All right? How resilient are you? Well, one of the best ways to measure it is actually through the blood, okay? Blood work's phenomenal because it's objective and it's data-driven. This is like, we got to lock these things down in resilience because they need to be objective. Why do they need to be objective? Well, me working with performance-minded individuals, you have to look at objective markers because they won't tell you the truth, but they will tell you their truth. Okay, what do I mean by that? Okay, well, if I'm working with someone in the military, like, how you feeling today, man? Good, sir. Okay. And then if I'm working with an athlete, hey, how you feeling today, man? Good, coach. Good. It's just good. They're always going to say good. It doesn't matter who you're talking to. And they actually believe that. That's why I say it's their truth. They will tell you that they feel good because they're completely detached from the idea of not doing what they're supposed to do that day. And honestly, I identify with that in a really big way, okay? But blood work doesn't lie. Blood work doesn't care what you think about it, okay? That's why it needs to be objective, because I've had many people tell me that they feel good, but they're not, okay? Now, that might be mental resilience, but it is not physiological resilience. And unfortunately, these people will actually drive themselves into a state of fragility, the opposite of resilience, because they will get injured, they will break down, thinking and mentally overcoming their way into fragility. It's an inverse thing. It ends up tanking people in the long run. Secondarily, blood work's data-driven. So this is what allows you to actually make calculated decisions on exactly what chemical makeup that you need to attack in the body. Like, resilience is not just an idea. Resilience is measurable. Resilience is chemistry. Resilience is hormones. Resilience is all of these different things, and they're data-driven. So when you're looking at something data-driven, not only can you make a program more accurate, but you can actually avoid the things that are silly. Like resilience, I am going to not just get in an ice bath, I'm going to do burpees in an ice bath. And then I'm going to not put my head underwater in the ice bath because my head's going to be on fire. So my head is on fire while my body is in ice, and then I'm doing a burpee, and I didn't lose focus once. And that's how resilient I am. But man, this is what data, I know I'm being extreme here, but this is what data-driven removes, okay? Will that get you 1 million followers on Instagram? Yes, it will, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about actually defining resilience and then quantifying resilience. And when you do that, a lot of silly things just leave. They just leave the arena, okay? So, resilience is really all about stress. And it's really just what it is. So stress, what is stress? So there's a big difference between acute stress and chronic stress. When you have that acute stressor, it begins in the brain. It begins in the brain and the spinal cord. This is your sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight or flight branch of the nervous system, which is the opposite of parasympathetic, which is what you want to activate outside of the gym, which is your rest and digest component. But you've got the stress response that begins in the brain and spinal cord. And there's a hormonal process that will take place between your hypothalamus and your pituitary, and it will start talking to the adrenals. Your hypothalamus are going to secrete some cortisol releasing hormone to the pituitary. Your pituitary is going to secrete some adrenocorticotropic hormone down to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are going to start secreting all sorts of fun stuff. They're going to secrete things that really do a lot of these next two ones here. They're going to secrete cortisol. They're going to secrete aldosterone. They're going to secrete a lot of different things that have a big impact on electrolyte status in the body, fuel availability in the body. It's going to impact neurotransmitters. It's going to impact inflammatory status and short-term immune system responses. It's going to do a lot of these really good things. And honestly, this is healthy. Stress is almost always seen as this like unhealthy thing, but it's not. Okay? If you have a crocodile in front of you, you're going to want a very effective and very efficient stress response. Okay? Now, I don't know if you've watched lectures on stress before, but everybody in the world uses the example of a saber-toothed tiger creates a fight or flight response. We don't do that here. We do crocodiles here. We are going to do crocodiles here because we're different. This podcast is different, and crocodiles are awesome. And the saber-toothed tiger guy, he probably sits at home and he's probably, man, I wish that I had royalties. I wish I protected that and had royalties on every time someone used the saber-toothed tiger to explain the acute stress response, because that guy would be a billionaire. It doesn't matter what school you go to or what YouTube video you're on. People love the saber-toothed tiger explanation. I've noticed that absolutely everywhere. But here, we use crocodiles, right? We want to turn that switch on, and that is a healthy thing. And cortisol by itself, you guys, it's demonized, but it's actually anti-inflammatory. It liberates glucose so we can utilize it for fuel, liberates fatty acids so we can utilize it for fuel. It's important to activate a stress response, to stay focused and dialed and do all these things. It's important for training. Really, stress is phenomenal in the short term. Where it gets bad is in the long term. And that kind of goes, that's a lesson that you can take with you anywhere in biology, is that there's no such thing as a bad hormone. That doesn't exist. Biology would never make a hormone with the pure intention of it being bad for the body. That'd be the worst biological adaptation of all time. Things only become bad when they're either chronically high or chronically low. But when they are acutely high or low, that it is an adaptive response, and in almost all cases, a reflection of resiliency and allostasis. Where things get bad is, of course, in chronic stress, okay? If you are chronically stressed out, you have a prolonged elevation of cortisol. This can lead to hormonal imbalances, whether you're male or female. It really impacts hormone balance in the body. You're going to increase your fat mass. You're going to decrease your muscle. And if you haven't noticed, every single reference, you guys are going to get access to the slides, but every single reference is here as well. And I really encourage you to check out the research that I have here. I'm always going to speak from the evidence when I do these lectures. I'll tell you when something's my opinion based on, say, Vitality Blueprints database or something we found internally, or if it's just something from my coaching experience. I'll always tell you and preface my statements that way. But I encourage you to check out the research that I provide here as well, because it'll give you an even deeper look at everything that I'm discussing. Of course, chronic stress also leads to inflammation, things like C-reactive protein, which is an acute inflammatory response, and erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is a reflection of chronic inflammation. This runs linear with chronic stress, and then your body composition is just going to fall apart. Okay, you're going to have more body fat. You're going to have less muscle mass. It's going to be associated to sarcopenia as well. It's going to break down bone as well. And it just increases your frailty overall. Okay, so this chronic stress, this is something that that completely destroys resiliency. Acute is good, chronic is bad, okay? When the switch stays on, the cracks in your foundation, your system, they start to appear. And you could think about acute stress and chronic stress kind of like a fire in the forest. If you've got a campfire going, it's a really good thing. It can provide light, you can cook food on it, it can keep you warm at night. That's a really good thing. Where it's bad is if that stays on and that turns into a forest fire, everything burns down. It's a really good, simple way to think about acute stress versus chronic stress. I want to tackle this from an evidence-based perspective, all right? We now know what resilience is. We now know the methods at which we want to measure it, and we know the difference between acute and chronic and what we need to overcome in order to maintain stability through change. Having evidence-based resilience, this is like where things need to change, and the big reason why I chose this topic for my first episode here at Vitality Unlocked, because resilience isn't abstract. We can see it in the research. Mental resilience, physical resilience, organ resilience. You guys, this is all measurable. So like we need to stop just saying resilience when it comes to stuff, okay? But I want to break these down. I want to break down mental, physical, and what happens here. So for building mental resilience, and you're looking at the literature here, I mean, I'll go over these things pretty quickly, but Cross-sectional study here by Kim in 2024, looking at about 175,000 adults here. And what did they find? Well, low muscle mass, your skeletal muscle mass. This is independently associated with higher prevalence of anxiety symptoms. So you're looking at 175,000 people here, and it's muscle mass that was actually connected to anxiety more than anything else. So that's a really key component that I think is important to point out, and it bleeds very nicely right into this next one here with Kohler in 2017. Now this is a phenomenal study that I encourage you to go check out. They're looking at about 3,200 participants with major depressive disorder. So I'm bringing these things out because they reflect different levels of mental resilience or mental strain, depending on how you want to look at it. But I'll also be doing that in the physical world and teasing out like very straining things, like looking at stroke victims in physical resilience, looking at major depression in as far as the resilience goes in this paper right here. So looking at extremes to really see what's happening with allostasis and homeostasis at these ends of the spectrum. But taking about 3,200 people here, and the results, what basically happened here is you've got a cytokine and chemokine profile that's associated with major depression. Now, what does that mean? You could think about major depression. You can think about, okay, they had thousands of people with major depression. They took a bunch of testing processes on them, and they identified a unique fingerprint of inflammation when it comes to major depression, okay? That unique inflammation fingerprint nullified by muscles, completely nullified by muscles. That's an important thing to point out. We've got anxiety being associated with lower muscle mass in 175,000 people. And then when you're doing more precise data, you've got muscle mass nullifying the inflammatory fingerprint that is associated to major depression. And on top of that, you could see point 4 here, neurotrophins. They are actually released by contracting skeletal muscle, maintaining the size and number of skeletal muscles while providing nutrients for the nervous system growth of differentiation, which supports depression and anxiety disorders. Long story short, it impacts the nervous system too. So it's not just cytokines, it's not just chemokines being nullified here. The muscles are also supporting nervous system support that is also impacting major depression. So the body trains the mind and the mind trains the body, okay? I will die on that hill all the time. I will also kill on that hill. Anybody who tries to separate psychology and physiology, you just can't do it. Anybody who does it has maybe just been in isolation too long in terms of their own research. If you research one thing for long enough, you become almost too much of a specialist. And it means you're way locked in your world and you think that things happen independently of one another. And although you can have more knowledge of things independent of within the body, it doesn't mean that there's not a phenomenal amount of interaction between everything. Everything is connected to everything. The mind trains the body and the body trains the mind, okay? When it comes to building physical resilience, you want to actually look into 4 main categories here: inflammation management, immunity, glucose control, and hormone balance. Stroke victims with higher skeletal muscle indexes, they demonstrated lower follow-up neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is a pro-inflammatory marker. The presence of sarcopenia or low skeletal muscle mass content was shown to be associated with a higher post-operative inflammatory response and thereby was considered to underlie higher post-operative morbidity and mortality in these patients. What does this mean? Well, essentially in these patients, if you had lower muscle, you had higher neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which is a pro-inflammatory biomarker. So this is actually impacting your ability to have a protective buffer in a state of maximum fragility. And this is in 2024. And that's a kind of a sidebar here. Neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, that's one that can be pretty volatile in terms of it changes acutely. They're 2 blood markers. They're 2 blood immune markers. But in the ratio, they reflect inflammation. And I've actually found that in the Vitality data set. So there's thousands of blood data of individuals in the Vitality data set. And I've found that neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio actually clusters with white blood cells and C-reactive protein, and that's basically representing an inflammatory signature happening. So it's interesting. Yeah, I'll actually note that in the future. A lot of times I'll show you guys what's happening in the database, and I'll let you guys know what's happening in my experience as well, so you can stay ahead of the curve, because a lot of times this stuff isn't published. But then the people who are working with the best in the world and they have access to this information, I want to open that up to you now. So it's something I've seen in my database. But to get back to topic here, inflammation is a key thing to control in a state of resilience, because inflammation can impact your joint pain. It can impact your adaptive ability. It can impact your hormone balance. Inflammation can impact a lot of things, and muscle mass is controlling a very important indicator of inflammation, even in a state as fragile as this. Total in 2020, guys, 168 articles. I know I'm throwing a ton of research at you here, but I think it's critical when we're going over topics that I want to redefine. Just look at the participants here. We're looking at 79,000 people across these 168 articles, and higher levels of circulating inflammatory markers are significantly associated with lower skeletal muscle strength and lower muscle mass. Okay? Lower muscle and strength. 179,000 people, okay? That is critical, and another really, really dialed in relationship with inflammatory status. But moving on from inflammatory to immunity, think about inflammation a lot like breaking you down, and the immunity is like your shield. Immunity, I want to do episodes purely on the immune system in the future. Immune system is one of the most fascinating things that you're ever going to come across, and it has so many benefits that routinely go underlooked. Everybody talking about testosterone and stuff like that, and although that's a cool topic, and we'll definitely be digging into that, the immune system is just so awesome for high performance health. It's so awesome, okay? But I digress. In 2020, this is Rogeri, and honestly, Rogeri, I'll be butchering names across this series too. If you want names pronounced properly, this is not the place. I'm reading. I want to give authors all the credit in the world for their research because I love promoting scientists, but I won't say it correctly. That's what's gonna happen. But Rogeri in 2020, this is a phenomenal paper, and something that I want to point out. IL-6, this is an inflammatory marker, and you'll see it associated to a lot of negative things. But it's actually, it's one of those interesting things where if IL-6 is a myokine, which means like myo, muscle, kine, chemical. So if something is a myokine, it's a chemical released from the muscle. IL-6, when released from the muscle, is a good thing. You can see this on this figure here, this diagram taken from the paper. When muscular contraction happens, IL-6 is released as a myokine, and it actually acts as anti-inflammatory, and it supports the tissue healing process after injury. So, and of course, after training as well. So I just want to point out, you'll see immunity and immune system support, and you'll be connected to IL-6 as being a bad thing a lot. But that's IL-6 can be a bad thing when secreted elsewhere from, say, chronic stress or chronically elevated blood sugar. That's where it actually can be problematic. But there is a beneficial IL-6 as well that impacts the immune system that, again, comes from muscle. Immunity here also. Whew. I mean, if you got a pause button, you could just have a look at this one. Unbelievable paper by Bay and Peterson that broke down so much when it comes to muscle tissue as it relates to the immune system. I mean, we could spend a whole hour just here, but I'll just point out a couple of things there. You know, muscle's impact on GLP-1, muscle improving blood sugar control, muscle improving bone status in the body, muscle improving aging skin, muscle actually increasing BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is something that's really important for brain plasticity, for learning, for cognition, all these things. And fun fact, if you're like a nerd like me, and you might think this is cool, BDNF is a myokine. So many people attach BDNF just to the brain, and for a good reason. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It has brain-like activity. It's a myokine. It's actually secreted from the muscle. So it's one of the big reasons why training and muscle and strength are associated with better cognition and better cognition as you age. Like these things, again, everything's connected to everything. There's a pathway, there's a feedback loop, and there's so much that happens. And that's why movement's one of the best things that you could ever do for your cognition. Not just reading, not learning, not new skills, not communicating, like right there with all of that. And ahead of it, a lot of it, in many cases, is actually just movement and what that does for the brain. So just a cool little fun fact there. But you see, there's so many effects. And even in rodent models, having anti-cancer effects here as well. So that muscle immune connection is wildly robust, and we could do many series just on that. For glucose control, I remember we're going over inflammation, we're going over immunity, we're going over glucose, and we're going over hormones when it comes to building physical resilience. Because inflammation, that's going to be a lot of pain and movement and hold you back. Immunity, this is protection against colds, flus, illness. It's also the ultimate recovery machine. Again, we'll talk about this in the future, but one thing I never want you to forget is you are only ever going to recover to the degree that your immune system is healthy. Okay, write that down. You are only ever going to recover to the degree that your immune system is healthy. Your immune system is what recovers you from training. Your immune system is what recovers you from surgery. Your immune system is what recovers you from illness. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's always the immune system's job to go clean up what's going on. Okay, so that's a big part of it. So inflammation impacting our daily life in a lot of ways, immunity impacting our defense networks and recovery capacity. Now we're into glucose control, and next we're going to go into hormones. But glucose control is our ability to basically stabilize our energy. It doesn't matter who you are. Energy needs to be a part of your process to become the best version of you. Like improving someone's energy, it's like a hack that I've done in my coaching career, because I don't care who you are. If I can improve your energy, you're going to achieve your goal faster. It doesn't matter if you want to be a better dad. It doesn't matter if you want to be more productive at work. It doesn't matter if you want better workouts. It doesn't matter if you want to lose body fat. It doesn't matter what it is. If you have more daily energy, you're going to be able to point that energy in the direction that you want more efficiently. And that is a big reflection and big component of resilience, is to be able to actually go do those things, remain stable through change. But anytime you talk about energy, you have to talk about blood sugar. You have to. There's so many podcasts out there that talk about really fancy things when it comes to energy. A lot of fancy but real, but neurotransmitters, light exposure, micronutrient status, mitochondrial pathways. These things are all really cool. None of them freaking matter if your blood sugar is unstable. None of them. It's like one of those more boring things to talk about sometimes. It seems very clinical, but it's the big rock that needs to be optimal first before trying to dive into these little minuscule strategies. Okay. Now here, Haynes in 2022, they demonstrated that less skeletal muscle mass is associated with higher odds of prevalent diabetes, independent of body fat distribution. Okay. That's a really important thing to point out. Muscle is associated to less diabetes, even if you're fatter. It's purely muscle mass, okay? And you can actually see this over here on the side. The odds of diabetes were 1.31 times higher in men and 1.24 times higher in women per percent decrease in appendicular lean mass weight after controlling for age, race, height, smoking, and education. You look at the side of that. This is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Again, muscle, not just body composition as a whole. I'm not glorifying abs here. Muscle. Glucose control. Continuing the conversation, Kohler, 2017. Studies demonstrated a negative correlation between muscle mass and glucose utilization levels. There's a significant difference between the mean muscle mass of the participants, which is 36%, and the mean glucose utilization, which was 15%. So when you've got more muscle, the muscle is the largest warehouse in the body for depositing glucose, meaning it's the most powerful thing you could ever have in your body to stabilize blood sugar. It's muscle mass. Muscle mass is what allows you to store blood sugar. If you have chronically elevated blood sugar and no muscle to put it in, then it's going to remain high. It's going to create a lot of complications far beyond your daily energy levels. Okay? Muscle is the biggest thing that's going to help you in this world. Muscle also indirectly controls cortisol. Very, very important for maintaining hormone balance no matter what it is. Male, female, cortisol. Since the biological hierarchy is based on survival, it means it's always going to prefer the stress pathway. Your body will always prefer the pathway of stress because stress is associated to survival. And surviving today is more important than longevity processes and pathways that are designed for tomorrow. So that means cortisol is number one, which means it'll sacrifice any other hormones and any other. That's why it's catabolic to bone, it's catabolic to muscle. It's just thinking about getting to the next day. But muscle indirectly controls cortisol because, as you could see here on this slide, but I'll just make it simple, When you have circulating levels of inflammation, that really impacts cortisol and increases cortisol. But muscle directly lowers inflammation. So when you directly lower inflammation, you also improve cortisol status in the body in an indirect way, but kind of a direct way. Muscle reduces inflammation. Reduced inflammation leads to lower cortisol. Boom. Muscle impacts cortisol. Cortisol impacts all hormones in the body. So muscle plays a huge role in that. If it hasn't become obvious with all these papers that I'm going through so far, muscle, okay? Resilience Redefined needs to continue the conversation regarding muscle mass. All right. It has to happen. If it's mental resilience, we talked about anxiety. We talked about major depressive disorder. We talked about inflammation. We went over immunity. We went over glucose control. We went over hormone management, acute versus chronic. This is muscle, you guys. Everybody is talking about resilience as it relates to ice baths, resilience as it relates to how disciplined I am, the resilience as it like, oh man, I got up at 3:30 in the morning. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Now, you might care, but you can't. That's not defining resilience. That's not measuring resilience. That's not an evidence-based approach to resilience. Are there other ways to achieve resilience than building muscle? Of course. I'm not saying that at all. Are any of them as well-rounded mentally, emotionally, and physically as having muscle mass? No. Muscle is your ultimate buffer to mental, emotional, and physiological stress. It is the allostasis organ. It is the resilience organ, okay? Muscle needs to stop being talked about as just strength. Muscle needs to stop being talked about as vanity. Muscle is the body's resiliency organ. It is the body's resiliency organ. Resiliency defined and resiliency measured, resiliency programming applied. You need to have muscle mass. That is a non-negotiable in the book of Dan Garner. That is a non-negotiable. Muscle as a resilience organ. There's so many mechanisms that make this true. So we went over lots of big studies on anxiety and depression, inflammation, immunity, glucose control, and hormones. All these things really impact one's ability to maintain a state of resilience. But the mechanisms are right in the literature as well, okay? These aren't just observations, okay? This is a phenomenal paper, okay, by Schneider and Hanschen in 2015. It is just muscle as an endocrine organ, and it phenomenally breaks down how many hormonal roles muscle plays. Again, people think just the reproductive system is making hormones, and that's the only thing that matters when it comes to hormones. That's wrong. Muscle plays such a giant role, and of course it does. There's kilograms, there's many dozens of kilograms of muscle in your body. It plays a huge role in all things. It's that large, connected to everything. Man, I tell you, I told you I'd yell. I told you I'd start yelling. Muscle is resiliency redefined. Needs to be in the conversation. All right? End of discussion. But in the world of endocrine function, muscles, myokine secretion, IL-6, it's released from muscle tissue in response to stress, exercise, or contraction. This is pretty cool stuff too. I'd recommend if you're a biochem nerd looking into autocrine, paracrine, and endocrine. Basically, when you can have an effect, and this is when you can't look at it in the blood. Cells can interact with each other, just cell to cell right beside each other. But then you can also have an effect on nearby tissues, and then you can also have an effect in the entire body. And that's typically when you'll pick it up in blood work in the serum. But it doesn't. Myokines do all of that. They do all of that. They're absolutely everywhere, and they help manage the stress response. They help maintain homeostasis. They're all over the body all the time. So they act as a huge endocrine organ. And beyond that, they're also a metabolic buffer, okay? For substrate and storage release, for myokine secretion, for mitochondrial adaptation, act as metabolite buffering, and antioxidant status. There is, and I've gone over a lot of these already, but this is basically laying out the mechanisms of why muscle has such a powerful and independent effect on resilience. We're talking about managing substrates in the body so you can protect yourself, all of the myokines that signal other tissues to improve metabolic flexibility, fat burning, and insulin sensitivity, mitochondrial adaptation. So this is the biogenesis that it helps you function better under stress, improve ATP and energy demand, your metabolite buffering, so essentially acting as a buffer between stress and what you need to do in order to maintain stability through change. And lastly, a lot of people don't know that muscles through exercise actually improve your body's own ability to make antioxidants. A lot of people think antioxidants kind of just come from like blueberries or acai berries or whatever it is. Your body has its own endogenous antioxidant production machine. And once again, muscle supports that. Training supports that. You're able to do that very effectively, and they all act as a buffer to stress, which means they act as a supporter of resilience. Immune support, muscle activates immunity, which is anti-inflammatory, and also helps control visceral fat. And visceral fat's very inflammatory, which really impacts hormones and immunity and resiliency as a whole. You guys, this is a phenomenal paper that you should check out and read. But in summary, muscle mass protective role against stress comes hormonally, it comes through stress response modulation, it comes through metabolic buffer, and it comes as an immune support. So this is no longer about vanity. This is about protecting you. It's about protecting you, and it's just as importantly, and this is where I'll kind of end the show here, it's about protecting you as you age, okay? Building muscle is building resilience, but it's also building longevity. Another key part that needs to be in the conversation, a phenomenal paper by McLeod in 2016. Guys, this stuff's been out here. It's been 10 years ago almost at this point in time. Muscle mass is associated inversely with mortality risk in older adults, independent of fat mass, independent of cardiovascular risk factors, and metabolic risk factors. Okay? I want to pause and say that again. Muscle mass is associated inversely with mortality risk in older adults, independent of fat mass, independent of cardiovascular risk factors, independent of metabolic risk factors. Muscle is a longevity organ. It's a resilience organ and it's a longevity organ. The data is unbelievably clear. And there is plenty in this world here. But you can see a young muscle versus an older muscle of someone who's not training, and then an older muscle of someone who is training. Okay, this person here, this person actually. So B versus we got here D versus E. D, this guy's actually heavier than this guy, and they're both in their 80s. And one here is 2 kilos heavier, but actually has less than half the muscle. It is less than half the muscle, even though he's heavier than that person. And things like this is what's protecting you from falls. This is what's allowing you to be more functional. And when you're more functional, you're more socially connected. This is also what's going to play into his hormones, his myokines, his immune system, that right there, what you're looking at here. Yeah, there's a difference in muscle mass, but that's a different life altogether. Not someone who's aging well, aging with performance, aging with quality, mentally and physically, and someone who's not. You're looking at a visual description of what that looks like. Another paper here, another great paper. You look at this, all-cause mortality and cancer mortality. And you're looking at muscle mass of people with the lowest amount of muscle, a mid-tier of muscle, and then an upper tier of muscle. You could see on both of these here, and I'll just read the figure directly. Skeletal muscle strength and cardiorespiratory fitness is associated with healthy aging. Over the age of 60, all-cause and cancer mortality is with all-cause and cancer mortality, twice as likely in individuals with low compared to high. Twice. So when it comes to all-cause mortality, if you have the lowest amount of muscle in this paper, you're more than twice as likely to suffer from an all-cause mortality risk, and then also from a cancer mortality risk as well. Again, more than twice as likely. And I'm also not here just saying go bodybuild. Cardiovascular fitness also has excellent protective effects as well. So I'm not standing on the fence and saying just go be a bodybuilder. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But great evidence here to support fitness as you age. But again, very specifically, I want to point it out to muscle and strength as you age. Not once was body composition measured. That's an important point to point out too. I just showed you two huge papers. They actually didn't talk about body composition. It was strictly how much muscle you have. That's how important muscle is and how protective it is, even in a state of poor body composition. Do we want good body composition? Yes. Is it still protective in those states if you didn't have muscle though? Yes, it is very, very protective. What I want to leave you here with is an understanding of the fat-free mass index, okay? You'll see this as FFMI. You're looking at a table here from an excellent paper from Curie in 95 and Jagam in 2024. And basically, an estimation of fat-free muscle mass potential and a measurement of current fat-free mass relative to the potential. Where do you want to be? About moderate, right here. For women, this is between 16.31, 19.69, and men, 19.51 and 24.69, okay? So staying in the moderate world for FFMI to have maximum resiliency with aging, that's the target that I'd want you to have. You don't want to be too high, because when you're too high, there is a such thing as having way too much muscle mass as you age, where it can actually hurt longevity. That is something that can, of course, we can discuss that in a later date, but that is something that I hope a lot of you people would already understand. There's not a lot of grandpas out there that are over 300 pounds of muscle. I'll just say that. Almost none of them exist. But staying in that moderate world is actually a key part. So this is actually done in athletes, in male and female athletes. But then again, perfectly lines up. When you look at the longevity data, and this is from Graph in 2015, quartile 4, it actually lines up beautifully with the quartiles at which you have the best longevity. So utilizing FFMI to measure your muscle mass is not only going to be the best thing as a resiliency measure, okay, we've defined it, and now we know all of the blood markers associated with throwing it off or supporting it, but now we have a global indicator. FFMI is your global indicator of utilizing muscle as your maximum resiliency organ, and also utilizing muscle as your maximum longevity supporter and longevity resiliency indicator as you age. FFMI, taken from athletes, demonstrated further by longevity research, is the big take home for you here today. Okay? You've defined it. You know how to measure it in the blood work. You know what's important. And you have a global number and a target and a goal for you to achieve to take your resiliency to the next level. Resiliency is not a buzzword. It's measurable, it's trainable, and it's the foundation of human performance. High performance health is something I want to bring to the industry in a very powerful way. Health is not just the absence of disease. It's a big problem right now when people are doing tons of blood tests to just check whether or not they're in a disease state or not. Is that beneficial? Sure. You want a clean bill of health. That's a great way to do it. Will that help you think better, move better, recover better, be more resilient, have more daily energy, reduce your brain fog, help you deal with stress better, help you sleep better, help reduce your bloating, help you become a better version of yourself? No. Okay? No. There is a huge difference between absence of disease and an optimal state of being. Anybody here who wants to maximize their potential needs to be concerned with high performance health. High performance health critically demands that you have resilience, but high performance health is going to be an ongoing definition that we have in this series of Vitality Unlocked. You stick with me. I will give you an evidence-based approach to high performance health so that you can be the best version of yourself. Thank you for watching.